Adjacent angles. Let's learn about adjacent angles. Before we learn about adjacent angles, we should know the meaning of the word adjacent. In simple English, word adjacent means next to. So if we say two objects are adjacent to each other, what we mean is those objects are next to each other. Let's look at this picture. Here we can see a set of 5 poles placed adjacent to each other. That means these poles are kept next to each other. One important thing about these adjacent poles is that they are adjacent along straight lines. So we can see that these 5 poles are adjacent along these blue straight lines. After having got an idea about adjacency, do you know something about adjacent angles? Let's now learn about adjacent angles. So what have we done here? We've rearranged the poles so that they form angles. Each pole here represents arm of an angle. Can we find here pairs of adjacent angles? Let's try to do so. Well, this angle here is adjacent to this angle because these angles are next to each other. Also, this angle is adjacent to this angle for the same reason as these pair of angles are next to each other. Likewise, we can find other adjacent pairs of angles here. This angle is adjacent to this. This angle is adjacent to this. This angle is adjacent to this angle. And finally, this angle is adjacent to this angle. So here we can identify many pairs of adjacent angles. Now let's see whether this angle will be adjacent to this angle. Definitely not, as these angles are not next to each other. Similarly, for the same reason, this angle is not adjacent to this angle. And what do we have here? We placed one more pipe here, and let's see whether this angle will be adjacent to this angle. Definitely no. These two angles don't have a common arm as we have in case of all adjacent angles. So these angles are not adjacent. Let's take any one pair of adjacent angles here and let's learn about their mathematical properties. So selecting this pair of adjacent angles, let's call this angle 1 as this as angle 2. First property is adjacent angles do not overlap. So here we can see that angles 1 and 2 do not overlap. As a result of this property, whole angle AOC is equal to angle 1 plus angle 2. Second mathematical property is a pair of adjacent angles have a common vertex. So in angles 1 and 2, we can see that point O is the common vertex. It is common to both angles 1 and 2. Third mathematical property is that pair of adjacent angles have a common arm. So in angles 1 and 2, we can see that OB is the common arm. Last mathematical property is adjacent angles are coplanar. That means angle 1 and 2 lie in the same plane. If they don't lie in the same plane, then they are not adjacent. So we have learnt about 4 mathematical properties of adjacent angles. First is they do not overlap. Second is they have a common vertex. Third is they have a common arm. And fourth is they are coplanar. I hope you understood the concept of adjacent angles and their mathematical properties.